I'm a woman, I'm a human being, I'm a mother, I'm a free thinker, a poet, an academic, an activist, a rebellious woman, proud African. Stella Nyanzi is many things, but I think at the core of who I am is this little girl yearning to be free.
Stella Nyanzi, born 16th June 1974, is a Ugandan human rights advocate.
My parents raised me to be critical, to ask questions. I was never punished for asking questions. If anything, I learned to ask questions from my mother, who criticized and ridiculed and questioned everything every day in the kitchen as she cooked, at the table as we ate. And now, as a woman living in exile, I think core to who Stella Nyanzi is that questioning person.
Nyanzi is known as one of sharp critics of President Yoweri Museveni. She has not been afraid of calling him out over what she has constantly said are the injustices of his government. Her grievances with the head of state, she says, are personal.
I squarely call my father's death a murder. I squarely call my mother's death a murder. And often when I'm asked why I criticize Yoweri Museveni and why some of my poetry and writing against him seems to be personal, I say to them that actually my entry into politics is very personal. Yoweri Museveni, often I've called him a murderer of my parents because my father should not have died. He died looking for medicine.
Her father was a trained doctor who had a long exemplary history of treating many sick people all over the world. He retired from Uganda's oldest health facility, Mengo Hospital, before relocating to the village.
When he had a heart attack, he knew the medicine he wanted. He knew that that medicine is not kept in homes. People say to me, why didn't your father keep medicines at his home? The pharmacology rules in Uganda, but also world all over, have classes of medicines that are not to be kept on the shelves at home. They're only to be given upon prescription from a pharmacy. It took him about an hour to drive around looking for this medicine. And as he entered Masaka Referral Hospital, he died looking for medicine. A medical doctor passed out looking for medicine, a single vial, a vial of medicine, a thing this small, a vial of medicine. Our government prioritizes and still prioritizes defense and security, ammunition, over buying vital medicines. Failure of his government to prioritize public health funding, to prioritize emergency medicines, to ensure that our pharmacies for public health are equipped with medicines meant that my father died. And so Museveni murdered my father.
Stella Nyanzi's story is one of double tragedy. A year after the death of her father, her mother also fell ill and died. She also blames her mother's death on President Museveni's government.
After we had attended my father's memorial service, my mother was speaking to me on the phone, and on the stairs outside, she collapsed. And she said to me, Stella, I have failed to raise my chest. She said, Stella, it's actually serious. I cannot lift my chest. Call for an ambulance. It's serious. So I called the hospital 5 minutes away from our home, and they said to me, there's no ambulance. And then they said to me, oh, we can find an ambulance, but there is no driver because the driver's salary has not been paid for 5 months. Can you offer him some money so he can come and drive your mother away from the place she's collapsed? And when I said, oh yes, my family can raise some money for him, they said, oh, there's no fuel in the ambulance. Okay, so we can raise some money for fuel. And I was processing all this and calling my mother and calling them to say, have you now got the ambulance? Have you? And my mother said, Stella, call a neighbor, leave the ambulance alone. As they entered the same hospital, which my father died at the same gate, my mother died.
She still carries the scars of the death of her parents. As a result, she has vowed to be vocal about the injustices she says are perpetrated by the government in her country, Uganda.
People say to me, Stella, how much money would you be given to be silent? What's your price? And I say to them, bring back my father, bring back my mother. If my parents could be alive, my silence will go. My journey into politics is very much the yearning of a child crying for her parents. And it can't be stopped, sadly. Unless Museveni brings back my father and he brings back my mother, there's no end to this. I want regime change. I demand better for Ugandans.
I want food! I just want food! We want food!
It doesn't matter if I stand alone. I can stand on my own with a placard outside Parliament and make my demands, because the fuel that fuels me comes from within.
She has been speaking out fearlessly against President Museveni for a couple of years now, and often taken to writing poetry to pen her grievances. Some of her poetic pieces have been seen to insult the head of state. Fearing for her life, she has had to flee her country on different occasions. Fleeing the dictatorship of authoritarian government regimes of her country, she says, began in the late 70s, during the reign of dictator Idi Amin. She was only 5 years old at the time when their home in the country's Mbarara district was bombed by unknown assailants.
My father's hospital was responsible for treating the soldiers. And so Idi Amin, the dictator, became very angry that while his soldiers were killing away the rebel soldiers, the doctors under my father's leadership were mending their bodies so they would come back to the front line. And so he sent a group of soldiers with bayonets who on that day they literally butchered, cut off the heads and shot dead doctors who were at work that day. My father fortunately had gone to the headquarters in Entebbe, and so his life was spared that narrowly. When he returned to the hospital, he packed up his family, that's including I, and he took us to a village home and left us there with my mother. He proceeded ahead of us and went to Nairobi, came to Nairobi, and he made arrangements for us to join him.
What she says is surprising is the fact that her father contributed towards fundraising activities for President Yoweri Museveni, then a guerrilla leader mobilizing against Idi Amin's dictatorship in Uganda.
These people are not observing social distance. COVID is causing accidents. I want food. You have not so spectacle. I can't see you bastards. I want food. My children are hungry.
But yet today, she lives in exile, owing to political persecution she says is driven by the president.
It is a contradiction in terms that in this new millennium, I, my father's daughter, who was a refugee against dictator Idi Amin, had to flee again. I have had to flee again. I fled last year in 2021, returned to Kenya with my children. This time I was running away from political persecution under Yoweri Museveni, who has made the U-turn from being a revolutionary liberation leader, a freedom fighter, to becoming one of the worst faces of dictatorship in Africa and perhaps in the whole world.
Towards the end of January, the year 2022, she yet again fled her country with her family. They are now seeking asylum in Germany.
As a writer, as a government critique, as a woman who refuses to silence myself in the face of gross human rights violations, in the face of injustices and mounting oppression by dictator Museveni, my life has been at risk in Uganda. And I chose not to stay, because to stay would demand that I silence myself. So this time when I went home in mid last year, 2021, I was determined to find a lasting solution to leaving Uganda until it became safer for government critics to be alive in that country and continue criticizing the failures of government.
Beyond having to flee the place she calls home, Nyanzi has been arrested on numerous occasions and even sentenced to jail time.
I've been arrested so many times. So many times. I think we stopped counting at about 20. In 2020 alone, I was arrested at least 8 times.
In March 2017, she referred to the president as a pair of buttocks in one of her poetic pieces. The following month that year, she was arrested and detained by police on charges of cyber harassment and offensive communication.
Why pair of buttocks? Because it's powerful in opening up possibilities for other critiques to use similar or related language to criticize and critique power in effective ways which the government knows nothing. They don't know what to do about it.
On 11th April 2017, doctors from the country's Butabika hospital were asked to carry out a psychiatric assessment examination to determine whether she was insane, as the government prosecutor was alleging. However, she and her lawyers mounted a fight against this and succeeded.
I've been arrested twice for offensive communication and cyber harassment against Yoweri Museveni. The first case is the one in which the prosecutors applied to the High Court that I be subjected to mental examination without. It would be involuntary. I wouldn't have to decide or to consent to these processes. I was in a private car and I was abducted in 2017 by men in plain clothes, but they were wearing masks and they had guns. I was abducted from a private car. I was driven around Kampala and then I was dumped in a holding facility. Nobody knows where. My lawyers and family were looking for me, and I was abducted on a Friday. So Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, nobody knew where I was. On Monday morning, I was taken to a division police station. Then I was arraigned before court, and my bail application was refused to be made. So we didn't even apply for bail. My lawyers were not allowed by the judge to apply for bail because they argued that only an insane woman would freely criticize a sitting government. And they based this on the Mental Treatment Act, an old colonial law of the 1930s that Uganda's colonizers had used to pathologize, make mental any critique of colonial power.
In October 2018, she was remanded to prison. This was after she had written a poem to President Yoweri Museveni regarding his mother's vagina. She did not request bail because she believed she was safer there.
I wrote a poem to Yoweri Museveni in 2018 celebrating his birthday, and I based that poem on his mother's vagina. I pray in the poem, I make all sorts of prayers, about 7 stanzas, praying that his mother's vagina had squeezed him to death. And Yoweri Museveni got really irritated because for a long time I'd been wondering, if he does not listen to advocacy and polite talk where Ugandans are begging and begging and begging for all these reforms and changes, what would touch him to the point of hearing? And I thought, what touches a man better than touching his mother? He was so offended I was arrested and immediately sent to jail, prosecuted, charged, tried, convicted, and sentenced to 18 months in prison. Now, I served 16 months and then I was acquitted because of a number of gross violations that the acquittal judge found in my entire case.
January 2019, she asked that her court date be delayed as she was ill and had suffered a miscarriage while in prison. Her dead and born child would have been her fourth. She planned to name the baby Justice.
While I was in prison, a number of prison wardresses would humiliate and torture me because they'd say, "You're a mother. How can you write about the vagina of Museveni's mother? How can you use another woman's vagina to shame a man in power?" And I say to them, "I'm pregnant." And they said, "You are in your 40s, you are menopausal, you cannot be pregnant." And I say to them, "Don't torture me, I have high blood pressure." And one night there was a lot of rain. They came to my wardroom and unleashed verbal and physical torture against me to the point that I had the miscarriage. And they were so uncompassionate that one of them said, "That is tomato sauce. This woman is pretending to be pregnant. That is tomato sauce. She's postmenopausal." And I remember passing out. When I gained consciousness, my baby was between my legs and they had dumped me. I think they had asked prisoners to carry me to another ward where I knew nobody around me. And when I reported about the miscarriage to the judge, the magistrate who was responsible for my case, she did not believe me. I reported as a prisoner to the Uganda Human Rights Commission. They sent commissioners to the prison to examine and interrogate the evidence. And the prison authorities scared prisoners who were willing to give testimony. They scared them with extended imprisonment.
This experience drove her to later write a petition about incarcerated women. She has been taking aggressive steps towards addressing the violations and excesses in her country.
Violations and excesses in Uganda is a mile long. I don't know where to start. For starters, the failure of democracy, the failure of constitutionalism, the idea that a military man can use military power to overtake the constitution, amend it. All institutions in Uganda have been overtaken by the military. The idea that a nepotist, the wife of the president, can be appointed as Minister of Education has meant that for the last decade, the public education of our children is managed by an underqualified person. Nepotism, from the Minister of Education to the Ministry of Health, even to security. The first son, the president's son, Muhoozi Kainerugaba, is the commander of the land forces in Uganda. He has been the commander of the Presidential Protection Unit. He's now managing affairs of the state to the point that there are now projects to emulate him as the next president of Uganda.
For Nyanzi, the denial of fundamental rights and freedoms to citizens in her country has made her more resolute towards ensuring that the ills perpetrated by Museveni's government are addressed, even if not immediately brought to an end. She has sought to use all methods, including her sexuality, to drive her message across. On August 2nd, 2019, she exposed her breasts in protesting at his sentencing.
I have bared my breasts in court as a woman magistrate was sentencing me unjustly. Instead of taking me to court, I was driven to the all-male prison and put in a small recording room where I was online, and I was teleported into the courtroom at Uganda Road. And I thought, this woman thinks she can sentence me in absentia. I have sat, for example, in a judge's chair when the judge was late to my court. I thought, how can a prisoner come from prison and get to court and wait for an hour? How can a judge, a whole judge paid by my taxes, come late to court, yet I'm from prison?
Her sexually explicit protests have been likened to pornography, but Ugandan activist and writer Stella Nyanzi says sex is the most effective way to shake people out of their apathy.
I undressed totally and remained in my panties at Makerere University when my immediate manager, a professor, was working with the state to deny me my promotion.
After her arrest in 2017, she was suspended from Makerere University. In December 2018, she was dismissed along with 45 other academics on the grounds that her contract had expired. She almost appears like she turns a blind eye to the risks she encounters in her quest for justice. One would wonder whether she ever fears for her life.
Many times I'm fearful because it's dangerous. It is dangerous to oppose a militant dictator. You'll get beaten up, you'll get tortured, you'll get abducted. In my case as a mother, separation from my children, as a single mom already, separation from my children is one of the worst punishments. What I chose to do was to utilize my fear as fuel. It makes me go. And one of the reasons why I kept writing and writing critically against the failings of dictator Museveni was I was scared. I was scared that they're going to come after me. So I'd write some more. And I was scared that they will shut me up, and I'd write some more. And I used the fear as fuel.
She adds that she is not the only person who has been a target of attacks in her country. Abductions of government critics have become rampant in Uganda.
My campaign manager, Asumani Semakula, a member of the FDC, was abducted at 4 a.m. from his house. And later on, his body was dumped outside Rubaga Hospital. This is on the official record. 2 or 3 weeks later, my lover was abducted from a car. In that moment is when I fled to Kenya. I thought, my campaign manager has been abducted. My lover has been abducted. Who is next? I'm going to go next. So I packed up my children because I had had enough.
The repressive regime of President Yoweri Museveni has made most activists afraid of going into the streets to highlight their grievances on the affairs of the state. Recently, news outlets have been awash with a shocking story of the detention and torture of a renowned author, Kakwenza Rukirabashaija, who was arrested on December 28th on charges of offending President Yoweri Museveni and his powerful son on Twitter. Stella Nyanzi has written a political prisoner series book titled No Roses from My Mouth, Poems from Prison, and has also authored various academic work. Her writing has provided insight into the effects of patriarchy, misogyny, and homophobia in Uganda, the Gambia, and Tanzania.
If I was to look at role models, there are a number of African feminists. Wangari Maathai from Kenya. There's Nawal El Saadawi from Egypt. Both are now deceased. But I think in terms of inspiration, I draw a lot of grounding from my children.
She is now in exile in Germany with her family. In January 2022, they were accepted to live there on a Writers in Exile program run by PEN Germany.
I wrote a book of poetry when I was in prison. So now that I'm outside Uganda and I'm even outside prison, how many more books of poetry will I write? Some people think I've given up the struggle. Actually, I think for me that retreat to fight another day is a good strategy.